Okay, here's the last part of the video lecture series on learning for psychology, Sissonville High School. I hope that these videos will prove to be more helpful than actually just kind of doing these in class, because you'll have this to kind of look at and review. This is one of the more laborious parts of psychology. It's one of the bigger lecture units that we have to cover in this class. So hopefully this format has worked and the weather has helped us be able to do it like this as well. Now, we're going to finish up talking about cognitive learning. We talked about the representative heuristic. We talked about stereotyping. I gave you some images. We talked about the fact that with the representative heuristic, and again, a heuristic is a general rule of thumb or a shortcut we take that we use to get to know people, as opposed to spending time getting to know people individually. Now, we also fall victim to the availability heuristic. By definition, the availability heuristic refers to the fact that and write this down, we make decisions about things based upon how many examples we have available to us. Again, the availability heuristic refers to the fact that we make decisions about things based upon how many examples we have available to us. What's available? The word available is key there. Let me give you an example. School violence. Without thinking about it too much, what would your answer to this question be? Is there more school violence today, or was there more school violence in the 1950s? Okay, think about it for a few seconds. Almost overwhelmingly the answer I get, and don't Google it, that's not fair, the answer that I generally get is, well, there's more today than there was back in the 50s. Well, and you would be incorrect. We tend to think that because we have more examples of school violence today available to us, because we live in the today, right? We have media, we have social media, the internet, news stories constantly bombarding us with stories of school violence. Anytime anything happens in a school, everybody hears about it ad nauseum. But what we don't realize is back in the 1950s, there were actually more incidents of school violence by far than there are today. But we don't know about that because we're not living in the 50s, and there wasn't all this news coverage and social media and the internet back in the 1950s to bring all these stories to us. So that's the best example of the availability heuristic. It's a shortcut we take that can lead us astray. And the last problem-solving approach that is a heuristic that we use that can also kind of get us into trouble is the adjustment, otherwise known as the entrapment heuristic. I'm going to call it the adjustment heuristic. By definition, if we employ the adjustment heuristic, we make a decision and we stubbornly stick to it, even if we realize somewhere along the line that it is a bad decision. Okay, let me back that up again. Again, definition of an adjustment heuristic: we make a decision about something, and instead of getting out of that, when we realize we've made a bad decision, we stubbornly stick with it. Okay, let me give you a good example. How many of you have ever been trapped watching a bad TV show or a bad movie? Do you stop if you're right in the middle of that movie and you've invested an hour in it and you realize, God, this is awful, this just sucks? Do you stop watching it, or do you think, I've come this far, I'm going to finish it out? Even if it's terrible, I'm going to at least finish watching it. That's the adjustment heuristic. I remember when I first started dating my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, I wanted to take her to the movies, and as it turns out, long story short, she already had made plans with 3 or 4 of her girlfriends to go to the movies. So, of course, I said, well, we'll do it another time, not a big deal, go have fun with your friends, no biggie. And she's like, no, come on, we'll all go. So I'm thinking, no, okay. So I thought, I'm going to be the nice guy and score some boyfriend points. So I bought movie tickets for everybody. And I thought, well, that'll be kind of nice, get me some points. It's kind of a nice gesture. And I do that. And we're all sitting in this movie, and it is the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. I think it's a movie called The Englishman Who Went Up a Hill and Came Down a Mountain. It was horrific. It starred Hugh Grant, who was a popular actor in the early and mid-90s. And that was the main reason that my wife and her girlfriends wanted to go see this movie. So about 30 minutes into it, after I've spent $100 on tickets and popcorn for everybody, I'm sitting here thinking, this is just terrible. I mean, you see the picture right here, people falling asleep. That's about what it was like in the movie theater. It was just really, I'm not trying to rag on the movie, but it was just not a good movie. So I looked over at my girlfriend and I said, do you like this movie? She's like, nah, well, let's give it a chance, but nah, not really. Hour into it, I asked her again, hey, you like this movie? Do you like this? She's like, it kind of stinks. And we all agree that it's a terrible movie, but by golly, I decided I'm going to sit here and watch this movie, even if it stinks, because I've invested so much money and time into it, I'm not leaving. So that was the adjustment heuristic. I would have been better off had I gotten up and just snuck into another movie theater, or just left and had a conversation with my girlfriend and her friends in the parking lot. That would have been a better use of time. A better example of the adjustment heuristic from a psychological standpoint might be abusive relationships. I hear this all the time from victims who are in abusive relationships. I ask them, and people ask them, why don't you get out? If your boyfriend or your husband is abusing you, why don't you leave? And most of them will not and do not leave because they've invested. They'll say, well, I've invested so much time, love, money, I have children with this guy, I don't want to break up the family, and I think he'll change at some point. They've invested so much time in the relationship that they want to see it through, regardless of whether it turns out good or whether it continues to be bad. So you can make an argument for the adjustment heuristic as well there. So now let me move on to the last type of learning. Oops, went too far. There we go. So we've covered classical conditioning, we've covered operant conditioning, and we just finished up cognitive learning. So the fourth type of learning is learning by observation. A very simple type of learning, but very effective. How many of you have ever learned something just by watching somebody else? Maybe you watch somebody screw up, make a mistake, and you're like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I remember sitting in class one time in college, and I remember thinking, yeah, I would like to ask this professor a question about this certain topic. Well, another student beat me to it. He asked this professor the same question, and this professor was just very mean and angry and just really embarrassed this other student. So I'm thinking, I've learned. I'm not going to ask that question in class because I don't want to be treated that way. So we learn by watching others. We learn good things. We learn, positive things. We also learn bad or negative things by watching other people. But it's simply learning by watching others. Albert Bandura was a social psychologist, and he's mentioned in chapter 4 in your book. He did a classic study in the 1960s. In the 1950s, television was basically becoming pretty much popular, and almost everyone had access to television by the 1960s. You had what was called or termed violent TV programming that was on television in the 1950s and 60s. These westerns with guys shooting guns. The idea was that people are starting to worry. Kids are watching. Children are watching this violent television programming. What's going to happen when they grow up? Are they going to repeat the violence that they see? As children, they're so impressionable. Are they going to go out and try to repeat the violence that they see on TV? And there was an outcry. There was a real concern. Some people said, yeah, kids are susceptible to this. They're impressionable. They're going to go out and maybe do some of this stuff. It creates a problem. Others are like, no, it's just like video games. You guys have grown up through the video game generation and through that revolution. I always ask in class, how many of you have been exposed to violence in the media, on the internet, played violent video games, watched violent movies? Every hand goes up in the classroom. Does this mean that you've gone out and repeated these violent behaviors? Has it made you a violent person because you've been exposed to it? And overwhelmingly the answer is, well, no, because most people, even children, can, and certainly adolescents, can process violent media and not become violent themselves. That's sort of the consensus that we have come to. However, Bandura set up a study in the 1960s where he had a blow-up doll with a weight on the bottom of it. And he had adults, two situations. Adults would go into a room and they would beat the crap out of this doll. They would punch it, kick it, pistol whip it, all kinds of stuff. And a group of children were allowed to watch. Then the adults left. Children were allowed to enter the room with the same doll. What do you think happened? Well, most of them beat the crap out of the doll. They kicked it. They beat it. They did exactly what they saw the adults do. In the other part of the study, they had adults go into the room with this same doll that you see here, and they modeled appropriate behavior. They did not hit it. They did not strike the doll. Now, when the kids had the opportunity to go in and interact with the same doll after the adults left the room, how do you think they behaved? They were appropriate for the most part. They did not kick it. They did not beat it. So the lesson here was that children are basically repeating what they see, for better or for worse. Now, there are some criticism with that research, and rightly so. This is a laboratory setting, not a real-life, real-world setting. So that creates some criticism for this research. And we know, again, that most of you have been exposed to violent media and have not become violent yourselves. So, now, the last slide here. There are 4 Yep. 4 components to observational learning. You have attention, retention, the production process, and motivation. In order for observational learning to occur, these 4 things have to be in place. First of all, attention. If you're going to learn by watching someone else, you have to pay attention to what they're doing. For example, the first job I ever worked, I had to learn how to run a cash register. So I had to pay attention. I didn't read a book about how to run a register. I had to watch somebody do it. And I learned. I had to pay attention to who was running the register so I would know. Okay. Second step, retention. Remembering what we see others do. So when it was my turn to run the register, I had to be able to remember what I saw the person doing who trained me. Then you have the production process. So not only do I have to pay attention, not only do I have to remember what to do, I have to be able to physically do it. I have to be able to use my hands and hit the numbers and the keys on the cash register and do it. And then last but certainly not least is motivation. I have to be motivated. I have to have a desire or a drive to demonstrate my learning. And I see this all the time. I see people who pay attention, they remember how to do it, they're able to do it, but they're just not motivated. They don't want to run a cash register, or they don't want to play their sport, or they don't want to take a test and show that they can pass and show that they've learned something. So you have to be motivated to do it. I've coached athletics. I think I've mentioned that in class. And I've seen athletes your age and younger and even older who pay attention to their coaches. They remember how to execute a skill, whether it's swinging a bat, whether it's fielding a ground ball, whether it's shooting a basketball, whatever. And they're able to do it. They can really do it well in practice, but they just don't want to play. They're not motivated to show it because maybe their parents are pushing them to play sports and they just don't want to. Or they're not in the mood to play this day or whatever. So all these steps have to be in place for observational learning to take place. And that concludes the unit on learning. And if you have any questions, please email me, let me know. Don't forget I've assigned notes on this that are due as well. So make sure you check InGrade and check your emails about this as well. All right, that's it for this part and for the entire part on learning. Thank you.